So we've heard a lot of really interesting talks, exciting talks. One of the things that is really hard to do is to take observations from the bench side or from the bench to the clinic, right? So that clinical translation is a very difficult step, and we've heard several different approaches this morning. I think one of the questions that comes up quite a bit is from patients, certainly, is how soon do I get to see these treatments in the clinic? And so I want to open with that. Because, right, the timelines are going to be different for different approaches, but given the expertise up here, can we provide any direction or sense of time in terms of moving the different approaches actually into the clinic? And I know we've talked a little bit about this.
I think these guys can answer the question from the stem cell therapies, but from an amniotic membrane, the therapies are there, they're available. They just have to go through the relevant regulatory processes to be able to be approved within the marketplace. And ultimately, amnion is not regulated in the same way as stem cells. So once it's approved for transplantation purposes, it's a clinical decision how they use it, whether it's in an epithelial defect, a chemical burn, or AAK. So it entirely can falls onto the clinician from my point of view.
I had a question for you. Could you put that on a mouse eye?
So from a human, so xenotransplantation has been shown to be possible. So we were, in our original form of the business, we were supplying veterinary ophthalmologists that were treating rabbits, cats, dogs, snakes. I think there was one seal that was treated. So in principle, you could use this in a research perspective. Yes.
Thank you.
Do you have a comment on?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I comment from my side on the smart contact lenses. I think it has been a hype for a couple of years to join electronics in a contact lens, and companies have tried and have failed because of several reasons. I think we are now in the moment where technology is able to bring the different components that I showed today, and now we're just some steps behind the market introduction. I would say that within the next 3 to 4 years we can see these devices in the market. And for us, always the difficulty is always to go through the clinical trials, through the regulations, through the proper safety channels, of course, that we need to follow. And this always requires time and money, which is always difficult to find. So this is always the challenge of a company like us trying to bring a product to the market. But very soon then we will get collaborations with bigger companies that have done this many times. And this is how we can get the product to the market. Yeah.
And with the new device, with the new regulation on device, do you think that this one is going to take for you much longer to get your device into the market?
So not really. Indeed, we consider already all the MDR, which is the new medical device regulation in Europe, and also all the FDA, de novo application in the US. So since the beginning, we have considered that, taking that into account. I don't think it's going to take us longer than any other device before. No.
I just wanted to add that now that we have the proper tool to mimic the human AK, so maybe we can proceed to try new therapeutic options as we have already started with, for example, duloxetine. So I think soon we can be optimistic to soon hear good news about some good therapeutic options that we can apply for human cases.
Okay, so that's a great point. So, right, if we think about the design of drugs to treat any disease, right, the one approach is to start from the beginning and to find new drugs, and we have to go through preclinical and clinical trials, et cetera. What is the advantage of using drugs that are already approved in terms of moving them from, adapting them to treat new disorders, do you think?
Well, for example, about the duloxetine that I have experience with, it has been already FDA approved drug, so it means that it has been used already in the human, so it's safe to use, and it's just about retargeting the use of the drug, so it's much, of course, easier to use the already approved drugs.
Yeah, and I would like to add, I mean, in the eye, it's so common to do so. So all for like for macular degeneration, they all took like the cancer drugs, put it into the macula, and now we put it into the cornea. So it's very common to do so. And I think it's a good way to do it because it's much, much quicker if it's already approved in some way and not just made in a lab and tested then, and then it's going into production and into FDA approval. So I think it's a good option to do so if you have the possibility.
Excellent. So, right, those of us who kind of work in this space have a sense of time, but those who don't work in this space don't really have a sense of what soon means. So can you help us define, and I'm not going to hold you to it, can you help us define, though, what sort of a realistic timeline might be for a compound?
I can't. I really can't. I've never done that, and I don't know. And I think it's also very different in each country.
That is true.
Can you say more about that?
I can say about our mouse model because it's age-dependent AK. It has age-dependent AK phenotype, and it developed AK latest up to 4 or 5 months of age. So it's kind of easy to handle the timing to try the drugs firstly at the earliest stage of AK, and then wait 4 months to have the advanced AK, and then try the drugs. So.
Sure,
I
but
think it's
then
possible.
going into the clinic from that step, I think that's
Yeah.
something I can't tell how long that takes. No,
Yeah, no one.
no,
Of course.
If I can just elaborate a little bit, I mean, of course, I don't work in a company. I'm also a clinician, but I gained some experience on this, and I think that generally, like roughly speaking, when you start with a new molecular entity from scratch, so option 1, it takes approximately 10 years to get to the clinic, and the cost approximately is $1 billion US, perhaps now a little bit higher. It's increasing. But on the other hand, when you take the shortcut of drug repurposing, like duloxetine, or I don't know specifically about duloxetine, but of course, like you repurpose an existing drug, that really depends on, if this drug was already used for ophthalmic use, but for a different disease, and you repurpose for another ocular use, or if, for instance, it was used for IV or, as a pill, it changes, but we are looking probably at, depending on the type, to 3 to 5 years. So it's significantly shorter, but yes, it's not tomorrow. So that's.
Can I just also add was something when I was working with Ataluren and Amlexanox, it popped in our conversations, is that the downside of these repurposed drugs is that for companies, which I think are essential for the clinical trials, right, they're not so interested because they're already been, either the patent is already expired, and so it's not as profitable financially, I'm sorry to say. So sometimes they're not very interested in picking them up and moving them forward. So then we have a good idea, but then it just doesn't flow. And what do you think about that? How can we overcome them? How can we convince companies to push them?
We have an example of that in gene therapy for a completely different disease in Canada, where it was invented in Canada and it went through all the clinical trials, but the cost was so high that none of the insurance companies would cover it, and it basically got taken off the market because it was so expensive. So what's happened is the Canadian government has bought the rights back to it, basically. It was developed under Canadian funding, and they are going to make it part of their delivery system, and they're going to make it available, and they do not have to make a profit. In fact, being a government, they never make a profit, right? And they really think that they can bring it back. It was always clearly worked well. It just was not profitable for the big companies. And so the government has taken that one over, and they're hoping it's a model for others that they'll do the same. This is just the first one that they've done.
Yeah, I think we got something similar also in Europe, because if you remember, like, for example, Strimvelis for the ADA, the X-linked disorder, I mean, that was developed by, I think it was GSK or somebody else, and then it was delivered to another company, and then but it wasn't a success. I mean, there aren't so many patients around, and then it was taken over by, in Italy it's called telethon. It comes from the American experience of raising money from TV, and they funded like a non-profit organization, and they took it over, and it is known for profit. So for those patients, very little number of patients that they need. I mean, there's telethon now, a non-profit foundation offering the Stream Values product, and I think that this should be probably the way that we would think. The other way is that, I mean, things are changing a lot. I mean, if you look at the experience with Holoclar, I mean, the first paper by Pellegrini et al. Was back in 1997, and the marketing authorization, the approval from the Commission came in 2015, so quite a long time, because we had from the idea of the limbal stem cell deficiency treated with limbal stem cells to actually a product in the market. But now, I mean, the European Commission is basically making an effort to support the academic and the non-profit organization to come up with new solutions. There is the orphan drug designation. So they are coming towards us to sort of moving forward with new therapies. So probably for the next product, the next stem cells products, it won't take that long before we see something in the market.
I had a similar question, a similar theme, and I was going to reference Holoclar. Has anyone who are developing the stem cell, I mean, the research coming out is absolutely amazing, and I think we will get there to a point where there will be a viable treatment. But has anyone actually had any foresight of actually planning the commercial route? Because ultimately that is the end game of this, is getting this into a commercial entity to take it out. And I think not to fall into the same pit as Holoclar. The regulatory and registration process is long, it's costly. The manufacture process, unlike pharmaceuticals, is also extremely laborious, and scaling it across continents is going to be really challenging, and therefore the profit margin for companies, and also from the number of patients that this will benefit, is low. So their cost of treatment is going to be astronomical. Has anyone actually ever scoped any of this from an Aniridia perspective?
So,
I mean, that's the person to talk to.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, maybe you want to say something.
Yeah, from stem side perspective, maybe I can comment something. Well, of course, the first hurdle is to get the funding to actually get to the clinical trials, to get through the preclinical work that we need to do to get to the first human clinical trials. And at the moment, it's a tough game. So in Europe, the funding is very, very limited. It's a long process. Everybody's looking for a quick profit. It's not going to happen in what we're doing. So yeah, once we get there, then maybe there's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of EMA, and we get a lot of for rare diseases, there's a lot of things we can do, and the regulatory agencies are giving us a lot of help with that to actually get to the clinic. But yeah, it's a long road, and it's difficult.
And what kind of pricing do you think these sort of therapies will end up being?
Well, I mean, something we're getting a bit frustrated, and we're gonna we hear all the time, is that it's not supposed to cost anything. So we know that's something we're actually now putting a lot of effort into, is that how we're gonna able to produce a product that's affordable. So minimizing all the components and taking everything away, serum, whatever. From the process that would then add into because everything needs to be tested. Whatever we put in the product needs to be tested, and we have to be sure that it's safe for the patients. And everything like that adds to the cost. So what we're kind of now trying to do and optimize is that we could minimize all that, so that the product, when it's ready to be on the market, is actually affordable and can be used. I think the price of Holoclar has been somewhere around 100,000 euros. The benefit for the patient, if you think about what it costs the society and for the patients and for the families, from that perspective, the price could be much higher. But I mean, is it realistic? Yeah, I don't know.
If I could just add one thing to that. So currently, I'm going to use sort of a general number, but to produce a cell-based product for use for first-step clinical trials in the United States right now is between 1 million and 1.6 million per patient, and that's for the eye. Right, and that, so to echo, right, it's not very scalable at the moment, and when one begins to genetically modify the cells, the cost goes up. So there's a long way to go on that one, in my opinion.
Although I agree with everything that you just said, how about the T-cell cancers? And, you know, they're harvesting the cells, they're genetically modifying them with CRISPR, they're putting them back in, the patients don't, they have to do every patient separately. The patients don't have to go in immune suppression, and it can be curative for some of these kids. It is a childhood disease, and so is aniridia. So the benefit is long. But when that was first proposed, everybody said, oh, no company will ever do it. Well, companies aren't doing it. At least in Canada, that's all being done without companies. And yet, we used to send our children to the States, but now we do them in-house. And it was simply a question of getting the expertise in-house. And every child is dealt with as an individual. So I think there's precedent ahead of us that will help us, even with the very rare diseases, make more progress outside of the commercial field. Yeah.
Really good point. Then I would like to thank the panelists very much for a really nice discussion.